So good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure as President of the Law Society to welcome you to tonight's discussion on why the rule of law matters to us all. Whether you're with us in person or watching online, we're delighted to have you with us. This year, we are celebrating 200 years of supporting solicitors and promoting democracy. Through events like this, we continue the proud legacy of protecting the future of our justice system and championing the issues that matter most to us, like the rule of law and access to justice. We're thrilled to welcome Emily Maitlis, one of the UK's most respected journalists. Known for her sharp insight, fearless interviews, and ability to get to the heart of the story, Emily's work has shaped public discourse in the UK and abroad. It is a privilege to have her with us tonight. Thank you all for coming, and now please join me in welcoming Emily Maitlis.
A warm welcome to all of you watching online, and congratulations to all of you in the room who made it through the London traffic tonight. That is no small feat. We're going to be looking at the very definition of the rule of law as a way into understanding why it is so fundamental to what we do, to our democracy, to the way we function. Lord Bingham described the importance of it as being accessible, intelligible, clear, and predictable, applying equally to all, requiring compliance by the state with its obligations in international and national law. And the Department of Education goes one step further. It says the rule of law is one of the concepts that should be taught in school as a fundamental British value. Let that sink in. We know that a strong rule of law, a full access to justice, ensures that the powerful play by the rules. That's what we expect. That's what we demand. That our rights are respected and upheld, and that our society not only function, but function well. And many of you watching, many of you here in the room will know that for more than a decade, the rule of law, access to justice has been undermined, whether it's through cuts to court funding, to legal aid, legal education, making it harder for justice to be done. At the same time, the rule of law has been positioned quite often as a tool for enemies of the people or lefty lawyers to frustrate the public will. Those working to uphold the rule of law, to improve access to justice, often face a series of challenges, and we're going to be looking at some of those challenges today. But I think one of the big questions is the ignorance or the absence of what it means from most people's life, how the rule of law and access to justice really shape our lives is neither widely known nor properly understood. And so today we're going to get to the heart of the matter, talking about why it's so important, how best you can convey that in a public sphere, make that argument to make it relevant to people's lives. So to our brilliant panel now, Dr. Linda Yu, economist and fellow in economics at Oxford, Professor Colm O'Cada, Professor of Constitutional Law and Human Rights Law at UCL, and Marcia Willis-Stewart, Managing Partner who's worked with the family of Mark Duggan, Grenfell survivors, Hillsborough families, advocates for Jean-Charles de Menezes, killed after the London bombings by police. And Marcia, I could go on. And I should also say that you have a role to play tonight. I've been promised that you're all familiar with Slido, more familiar than I am with Slido. So I may be looking to you for guidance. But if we stop the chat for a moment and ask you to find your QR code, click on the questions with your phone, that will then become part of the debate and part of the discussion we're having. So please sort of help us play along, as it were. To the panel, Linda, you're going to kick us off. We're going to hear in turn why it's so important to talk about the rule of law right now.
I think it's critically important to talk about the rule of law because it is the basis of trust in society. And as an institution, it's fundamental to how society operates, everything from if you were to have a job, you have an employment contract, it's fundamental to business. If you were to do an agreement with supplier. All of these things are absolutely the root of how we do commerce, how we can seek justice, how we can have a level playing field. And that's why a strong, effective rule of law provides the trust in society that makes for a healthier society.
Colm.
I would agree with everything what Linda said. I would also emphasize that rule of law is absolutely key infrastructure for our common life together as a society. It allows us to plan our lives. It allows us to have stable lives, to have an element of predictability in our lives. But also, crucially, it helps us to live free of arbitrary power, whether by public power or private power. In societies without rule of law, are often a key characteristic of those societies is your vulnerability to the exercise of arbitrary power, whether government ministers out of control or private employers able to do what they want, your big boss who rules the town through his will and doesn't have to obey law with no method of challenging their authority. So rule of law is the infrastructure that allows us to live stable, ordered lives, but also, crucially, allows us to live together in a free, democratic society, free from the arbitrary exercise of state power and private power.
And Marcia, you are there when things go wrong quite often.
I am. And I would want to add to what's been said, the rule of law is not merely a concept. It's how we relate to each other. It's our relationships one to the other. It's our relationships with our governments, with our police, every arm of government. But it's really about how we live together, how we work together, how we communicate. And yes, as a lefty lawyer, I'm going to call it out, I'm an asset, not a threat.
So let's just pick up on that, because when I said that justice was already under strain, I think everyone in this room kind of knew what I meant. And I want to be careful about this, because I was reading remarks from the Attorney General recently, Lord Hermer, who said, we're at a juncture in history. Big words. When the rule of law faces a whole range of challenges in the UK and overseas. And I guess my question is, don't we always feel like that? Do you always feel that we are at a juncture in history where the law faces huge threats and challenges? Or does this feel specific and more vital now? Marcia?
It does feel, we are in difficult times. And the truth is, in the last 10 years, we have seen the erosion of the rule of law. The threats that are coming are day after day. We see another thing that we can't do, or another government controlling something else that we would want to do. The things that have happened in the last 10 years, let's think about COVID, let's think about Brexit, let's think about, I want to say, look at the threat of Roe versus Wade in America, the Supreme Court decision. Who would ever have thought that would happen? And, I can see as a lawyer that although we've always had those threats, they seem to be coming at us nationally and internationally at an alarming rate, like an articulated lorry. Well, not just one, several.
So on that point, that's a really interesting point. You raised the question of Roe versus Wade, which is the overturning of a law. It's a change in policy, essentially, in the US. Colm, that's not erosion of the rule of law, though, is it? It's not would you see that constitutionally as a legal problem?
Well, law changes. Courts adjust the law with changing circumstances. Parliament adjusts the law in changing circumstances, often quite radically. So the idea of rule of law always makes room for flexibility in law. And those of you who are lawyers will know there's new law constantly. It keeps us all very, 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 very busy. But there's a difference between flexibility in the operating and functioning of a legal system and the sort of arbitrary, unpredictable, unjustified alterations in law that aren't justified within the existing values of a legal system and which effectively call into doubt some of the core values of rule of law, like predictability, certainty, the ability to live your life free of power, free of overbearing coercion. I mean, just to take the example of Roe versus Wade, that Supreme Court decision, taken by a court, and courts do interpret the law, instantaneously pulled back into existence a whole range of 19th century statutes in states all over the US. So in one morning, the law governing abortion in states like Oklahoma and Texas shifted from Roe versus Wade to statutes enacted in the 1840s with life sentences for tampering with a fetus in a womb and other sentences. So when you see that in action, that sort of radical change is very difficult to justify when you bear in mind the core values underpinning our concepts of rule of law.
And would you call that, I mean, does that fit into the definition then of a threat to the rule of law?
I think it created a situation, it's an example of a situation, of a change in the law and the manner in which it was done that led to an undermining of many of the values we associate with rule of law.
Okay.
Being incompatible. It created a situation on the ground which was incompatible, lacking legal certainty, lacking clarity, lacking predictability, all of these virtues which we associate with rule of law. You can argue the pros and cons of the US Supreme Court decision. You know, lawyers will argue about court decisions until the cows come home, but pulling back, a change like Roe versus Wade creates a situation, in the manner in which it was done and the way that lawmakers responded to it, creates a situation which is very, very difficult to justify as being in line with the values we like from rule of law, irrespective of how you feel about abortion. It just creates a situation of radical legal uncertainty where police don't know how to apply the law, women don't know what a law applies to them, legislators don't even know how to respond. It's not a rule of law happy situation.
It's really interesting because you use the word values, and Linda, you open with the word trust. And it's so interesting to take something that you think is, defined in statutes and, notes and commas and say, this is what is at heart. I mean, just to go back to the Bingham interpretation, accessible, intelligible, clear and predictable. And that's, I guess, what Colm is talking about being eroded. So when you talk about trust, just take us into that now. What do we lose when you start seeing the rule of law being undermined?
I think you start to question the very institutions that give you effective rule of law. So I keep using the term effective because there's lots of countries in which, for instance, statutes have been transplanted. I'm thinking about the former Central and Eastern European countries after the fall of the Soviet Union. They essentially adopted quite a lot of laws as part of a wholesale reform program, capitalism, democracy, Washington Consensus. But if it turned out that the transplanted laws didn't actually take because laws are organic, and the organic nature of law is actually rooted in its institutions.
Just give us an example, if you can.
Yeah,
the kind of thing that would be, you're talking about the sort of Eastern Bloc countries after the fall of communism, essentially, yeah.
Yeah, so if we stick with the Roe versus Wade example, I think you've always I think the jurisprudence is obviously something this audience would be very familiar with, and different jurists have different philosophies, and I think you've seen that on the Supreme Court. But I think what's the Roe versus Wade decision, and perhaps this erosion you were talking about, the trust in the very institutions, is that now eroding trust in the institution of the Supreme Court because of the composition of the justices. So previously you would have vast debates between different parts of the Supreme Court. You had Anthony Scalia, you had Clarence Thomas, and then you had a range of views. But The erosion part is to question whether the range of views is still consistent with the values, all the things that you've mentioned, as the final arbiter of the law. So it's that institution of the Supreme Court, I think, and it's part of a broad, I don't want to overstate this because it is part of a broader canvas of erosion of trust in institutions that I think we have seen before in history. But I think there is something about this moment which, because there's so much doubt about institutions that, we used to view as being, the neutral arbiters or the upholders of values. I'm thinking about, attacks on institutions of monetary policy, given, I do economics. And I think it's that kind of widespread breakdown, perhaps, of a consensus around institutions that's really challenging how we view the fabric of our society, which is built around predictable institutions, effective rule of law, access to justice, level playing field, and you shouldn't be questioning whether the very institutions are not operating in a way that's consistent with the values that we all think a society needs to build on, which is fundamental to how democracies operate. So anyways, I'll finish with this example where, I'm not going to ask how many of you have done jaywalking.
Hands up.
There is a tube strike. You are excused. But my point is, you make a decision every day as to whether you break the law. And you don't break the law because it's the right thing to do. It's a norm. You respect the institutions. You want to be law-abiding. There's a lot on that, which is the trust in the law itself. In Russia, there's this concept, which is the opposite. I can't pronounce the term, but it's basically like you're applauded if you break the rule of law in the Soviet Union. So basically, it's the opposite. If I said who did jaywalking in Soviet Russia, apparently, if you raise your hand, people are like, oh, yeah.
Okay, so I want to push back on that a bit because this seems to me to rub up against questions of democracy. And it's a really uncomfortable place. But you talked about sort of failure of trust in institutions as if we should automatically trust our institutions. That's how we've been brought up. We trust our institutions. Marsha has been working with people, I'm imagining, who do not trust institutions in the same way, whether it's the Met Police after the death of Jean Charles, or whether it's the building regulations after Grenfell, or whether it's politicians after Hillsborough and the cover-up. So these are people, presumably, understandably, who say, to hell with your institutions, to hell with your trust, because I put my trust in them and it didn't work. Is there a sort of friction there?
There is a friction. I mean, I want to say that all of these people ultimately did trust the institutions.
Yeah. And
these institutions failed them. And the sad thing is, I mean, if we look at Hillsborough, we look at an institution, the police failed those families, not because, the command to open the gate or close the gate or whatever, but they failed the families by covering up and lying and then blaming the families and the fans about what happened on the day. And the failure and the lack of trust and the destruction of that relationship that was before probably built on, as you say, the way we were brought up, built on integrity, fairness, etc. The erosion came about from not just the behaviour, what happened on the day, but what happened thereafter, the lies, the cover-up. And it took 27 years for police to finally say, we lied. And it wasn't just about the 96 people who died, it was about an entire city. A city failed, a city that actually felt entirely shamed by the lies told by the state, the police. We then look at, you talk about trust. I recently acted for the family of Ruth Perry. Trust you know,
We should explain the head teacher
head
in the Ofsted
teacher
case.
in the Ofsted case, who sadly took her own life. And, you know, here was an institution, Ofsted, a government institution, that felt that it didn't need to be accountable in respect of the way inspections are carried out. They didn't feel that they needed to actually think about what happened on the day and days following the inspection. But the one good thing that did happen was that they were called to account. But sadly, there's a loss of trust in Ofsted. And right now, there are challenges to the decisions that are being made.
Colin, do you know, I'll open it up. Do you know where the public is, both here and in the US? I mean, just to compare, in terms of our trust in the rule of law, to bring this back to the rule of law, trust in the rule of law here. I mean, in the US, we've seen pretty much 4 years of attempts to undermine, you know, what the Department of Justice has been doing, etc., certainly in attempts to bring Trump to trial. And the Supreme Court is, there are no judges of the judges, right? That's, you are on the Supreme Court for life. You can't be removed. If you are, let's say, open to bribery, if you are open to coercion, there's nobody who gets rid of you. So I'm just interested to know where people's trust is now, both here and in the US.
That's a great question. We're living in a time of very sharp political division, of radical polarization around many key issues. And this isn't just the UK and US. I was in Brazil 4 weeks ago, where they're dealing with the aftermath of their own January the 6th there. And increasingly societies are divided. And then that impacts upon trust upon institutions. And the polarization is very contaminating. Radical polarization is really contaminating, because then institutions get under attack from both sides. Trust in them is undermined depending on a particular decision they make. And I think we're seeing this dynamic in the US. I think we're seeing this dynamic here. We're seeing this dynamic in many other countries. And in that regard, I think it's crucially important to remember that rule of law is an achievement. It's not something you take off the shelf and put it into place and you're up and running. It's not an app. You don't download it into your legal, political, economic, cultural system and off you go. It's something that needs to be built up over a very, very long time. Some societies never succeed in building it up. Linda mentioned Russia. I mean, the Soviet Union, the attempt to transplant rule of law just didn't happen. It never took off. Now, in societies like the US and the UK that did manage the achievement of building up rule of law, that was done by people in positions of authority, judges, politicians, civil servants, media figures, but us all collectively almost, engaging in a common project of respecting the values, even in times of sharp disagreement. And there was an underlying commitment to this constantly trying to build up rule of law values. And I think that now we're back in a time of ferocious contestation. But this isn't the first time we've had deep contestation in societies. But I think it's crucially important that now, recognizing that division exists, that we think again about this long, long project of committing ourselves to rule of law and building up rule of law, and that it's crucially important at this time that leaders in different institutions, sort of stick to the course and chain themselves to the mast, like Ulysses in the Odyssey, and sort of adhere to rule of law values, even if that brings an economic cost, a political cost, might lose them votes, might lead to less criminals being locked up, fewer criminals being locked up, and so on. It's a time, in times of division, to say we're going to do things properly, even if it comes at a cost.
But I would add that it's not just about our leaders, it's all of us, all of you, me, we all have responsibility to actually put in place. And
What does that mean?
Well, it is about recognising and acknowledging that we, as Colin says, we are in a difficult time, but it does mean that we should and we ought to work together, and we should to maintain the rule of law, to challenge, to not join the mob or the pack challenging lefty lawyers, to actually support, to not actually, we can criticise our judges, of course, and if you want to complain about them, do, but we need them. We need them to interpret the law, and we need also to be able to, I would say as a lawyer doing legal aid work, I want to know that our government increases legal aid, continuously gives legal aid so that we can provide services to those who need it. And access to justice is a really, really key thing in keeping our evolving rule of law.
I'm going to bring you in a moment, but Marsha, you just raised a really interesting point about criticising judges. Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary, called for Justice Davis to be sacked over sentencing guidelines. Are you relaxed about that? Is it okay to call for a judge, a justice, to be sacked if you think that they're wrong?
No, it isn't, frankly.
So criticise, but don't...
Criticise, make a complaint. You know, our judges take an oath, and they are there to be accountable. And I would absolutely say, yes, criticise a judgment, criticise a decision, you know, make a complaint. We have a system, but actually getting up and grandstanding and saying, sack this judge, no.
I guess the point, I mean, I don't want to get inside Robert Jenrick's head, but I'm going to imagine just for one moment that he's speaking about a mindset. Yeah. So he's not saying it was one decision, right? Just come with me on this one. He's saying it's not one decision, it's the way of thinking, that somehow the judiciary is tainted by a way of thinking. Linda, do you want to sort of come in on this? I mean, what would be your pushback if that was what politicians were telling you? I mean, this goes to the question of the lefty lawyer, right? You know, that they think it's not just one person or one judgment, it's like, this is the brain worm.
Yeah, I don't want to get into his head either. No, I agree with what Marsha said. I think you can criticize the decision, you should debate the decision, but I don't think it's about, it's not ad hominem. And I think that's one of the, it's not about the mindset of this particular justice in your interpretation. It's their actions, it's their judgment, it's their reasoning, it's their analysis.
So take the man, take the woman out of it and just look at what's on the
It's like what we say in football, play the ball, not the man, you know, or woman. And we did really well in yours. I'm going to change some of these old sayings.
Yeah, they play pretty well. They play the ball pretty well these days.
Yeah.
Shall we go to Slido? She said nervously. Right, scan your QR code and share your thoughts on Slido. This is the first question, if we can just get it up on the screen, this one here as well, so the panel can see it. What government action do you think weakens the rule of law most? So, do you think it is, I love these, they're in a very different order, but is it A, making and changing laws too quickly so people and businesses don't know their rights? Is it B, poor conduct by ministers? Is it C, limiting certain groups' right to challenge the state authority? Or is it D, underfunding the courts and or legal aid? You might think all of them, but you're being asked what weakens the rule of law the most. If you had to choose one, is it A, B, C or D? Give you a second to let those... Do we think that's about right? Have we got the... Put your hand up if you're still thinking? Okay, right. Well, I'm going to take you to what we've got on the screen so far. So underfunding has got 52% of you. Is that right? I mean, does that tally with I guess there's a lot of people online who've done this. Underfunding the courts and or legal aid. Do most of you here think that underfunding is the crucial one? Does that, are you surprised by that, Colm, or does that tally?
Well, we are sitting in the Law Society. So,
there's a collection plate at the back.
no, I'm not. I'm not surprised. Look, I mean, in one way, it's obvious. If your legal system isn't going to give you a remedy against abuse of power, then it's all over, in a way. Being a little bit dramatic, but where do you go for a resolution there? So in one way, this is foundational. I myself would be looking at limiting certain groups' rights to challenge the state authority. Personally, I think you start getting in incredibly dangerous territory where you start picking out favoured groups and disfavoured groups. I think that's fundamentally corrosive.
Put some meat on that. Are we talking about the two-tier sentencing, or are you? I mean, just sort of talk us through what are these groups and who? Yeah, what do you mean?
If you're saying that, for example, if you're an asylum seeker, that you should have no ability to challenge your deportation, even if it's breaking up a family, for example. Asylum seeker, you should have no ability to challenge government decisions affecting you. Or if you're a foreign-born criminal, foreign national who's been convicted of offence with a UK family, the idea that you should be deportable at the ministerial discretion without any meaningful ability to challenge a decision like that, I think that's very, very bad. But I also think that if you're being arrested for a tweet, and you're being fast-tracked through a legal process where you're not given a chance to defend yourself, that's also really, really bad. Contestability is a key part of rule of law. The ability to sort of challenge what is being done to you by the state or by powerful private actors, and to demand a legal justification, to make sure the legal boxes have been ticked, but also that the values of rule of law have been respected. And that goes for all groups in society, and not just the groups we like at a particular time and the groups we dislike.
So we're not at a point where we are blowing up Venezuelan boats so far. But we are at a point, it seems, where the government is saying, you got the reference to the Venezuelan boat, right? As in Trump decided that it was full of a drug gang, a drug cartel, and he didn't just sort of arrest, he kind of went for it, and that was it. And I think when J.D. Vance, the Vice President, was asked about it, he said, oh, we'll do the investigation afterwards. Fine. We are not at that place, but we are at a place, and this does go back to the lefty lawyer's question, where the government feels stifled by things that it wants to do but can't. It wants to deport people once they have lost their claim, and it can't. It wants to be able to move quicker, and it can't. You're suggesting that you don't have much sympathy with that. I mean, if you're talking about asylum seekers, or if you're talking about migrants or people who want to try and prove their status, being denied it, going back to challenge it, and the government saying, sorry, we cannot have this case in the court for another 2 years, 4 years, whatever.
What I would say is that I actually have a lot of sympathy for government ministers wanting to get stuff done and responding to politics of the day, responding to policy priorities. And I understand why politicians chafe at the bit when they're confronted with all these legal obstacles, when the type of people in this sort of room come into them and say, well, that's very difficult to minister. If I was a minister, I would not love that. But the entire system, in a way, is designed to sort of make you bear a certain amount of cost if you're a decision maker to make sure that things are done in the right way. Now, of course, you can speed up procedures, you can clarify ambiguous legal situations, you can streamline mechanisms, you can put more money into handling deportation procedures. You can do all of these things, okay? But I still think it's very, very important that the demands of the emergency crisis moment aren't allowed to fundamentally erode rule of law. You mentioned what J.D. Vance was saying about the boat that the Americans blew up the other day. I mean, that's being justified on the basis, well, we have a drug crisis. We have an opiate crisis. Drug runners are running drugs into the US. It's not been stopped. It is an emergency. It is overwhelming us. We need to act decisively, and pettifogging lawyers shouldn't be getting in the way of this. That's what he's saying. Now, you might recognize some resonance. That might sound familiar. Everything is always a crisis. Everything's always a crisis. And the point about rule of law mechanisms is that it sort of says, hang on a second. You can streamline things, but it is important to us as a society that you go about this the right way, because that's what holds together this rule of law infrastructure.
So, Linda, Con mentioned the economic cost of this, and there is an economic cost, right? I mean, there's both an economic cost to not upholding the rule of law, and there is an economic cost to doing things so thoroughly that, you know, you give everyone who comes in 2 chances or 3 chances. I mean, how do you sort of weigh that? How do you quantify that in your mind?
So I think economic costs are the price that you pay for having a rule of law that's administered effectively. And so, you know, I think the challenging part of the debate is around how much friction would a politician accept for their policies so that they can execute their policies. And ultimately, the legislature can change laws, and they can change their position on treaties. They can, you know, this literally is the lawmaking process. And the question of legitimacy in our minds is whether or not we think these changes are consistent with the protections that should be afforded under a rule of law. And that's where actually public debate is needed, because we should be discussing, you know, what is the acceptable, you know, what is our politicians, are they putting forward policies which respect the rights as we believe them to be? Because a lot of this is around, as I say, trust in the institutions. But if you don't trust the motives, then I think you start to really question whether or not, you know, it's appropriate. And then actually, to give an economic example in the US, you might have noticed there's been a lot of tariffs coming from the US. And, you know, the US, basically, the appeals court for the federal system upheld a lower court decision from the Court of International Trade that said that, you know, the broad sweeping tariffs of the United States is not a legitimate use of the 1977 legislation, which was the basis for putting the tariffs on. And so that's an example, and that's an emergency kind of provision. It was used previously when, you know, Obama imposed sanctions on Russia after they invaded Ukraine with the Crimea. And so this goes to the point Con was making about that's an emergency power. So if you use that, then everything is an emergency. But that court ruling, which will now be appealed to the Supreme Court, actually exactly says, no, hang on. That is actually the cost. That's not an acceptable use of that legislation, even if you think that trade is unfair and we're going to, you know, blah, 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 blah.
But to that example, Trump hasn't put up his hands and said, okay, right, that's the end of my tariffs then.
No.
Right? So this is a moment where he's kind of saying, you know, this is democracy against the law. That's how he would frame it, right? I was voted in to deport people. You know, mass deportation was on the slogans. I was voted in to bring tariffs. This is you know, we've heard this in our own country. We've heard this with the proroguing of Parliament, the will of the people versus the lawyers.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you make the case then when that's going to be, if you like, the political answer?
Vote the politician out. Oh, wait.
Yeah, okay. So you talked about the ability for any society to relook at its laws, to relook at its treaties. There's a lot of talk right now around the ECHR. There are calls from some leaders in some parties to call to leave the European Convention on Human Rights. And even the parties that don't want to leave, the Labour Party government is suggesting tweaks. Just so let's start with the sort of the kids' version then. What does it do? What does it really do for us? And can you tweak? Marcia or Colm?
Well, the Human Rights Act, the European Convention on Human Rights, hand in hand with the rule of law, and I suppose, we speak about the rule of law.
The Human Rights Act is not exactly the same as the ECHR, is it?
No, but we talk about the rule of law evolving, and we talk about law evolving. And there is something about looking at where we are now and, really considering. Some time ago there was a discussion about a Bill of Rights. That fell apart. I don't know about tweaking. I think looking at the convention and looking at our relationship is one thing, but I'm not so sure about the response of tweaking the law at this moment because of the arguments that are going around, the Generic and the others, and the loud boo-hoo. I don't know what you want to say.
Well, okay, let me put it more starkly, because we've heard that leaving the ECHR would cost us the Good Friday Agreement, would cost us our trade agreements with Europe, would cost us our place within the sort of global community of, the Human Rights Convention as well. And yet you've got some lawyers, Jack Straw came out, I think it was last week, and said, oh, it's fine, the Good Friday Agreement will be fine, we can do this. I guess the question is, does politics always override the treaty? Or would leaving the ECHR negate all those things around it? What is your sense?
I would...
Or whoever, or Colm, if you want to do the constitutional
the constitutional stuff, because I'd be terrified.
As you may have gathered, I'm Irish. I'm not going to say much about Jack Straw's take on the Good Friday Agreement.
Why not?
Well, he is clueless about it.
That was all we needed.
And he actually had some quote about how it wasn't going to have any impact on the peace process in Northern Ireland. Jack Straw wouldn't know about that. And I think if you asked Jack Straw what the position of the Irish government was in relation to the ECHR, he wouldn't be able to tell you, or what the approach of many of the key parties to the agreement in Northern Ireland would be. I think he was operating from a position of fairly deep ignorance. But I want to skip over that. While still making the point. I think a key point here is the idea of friction that Linda mentioned, okay? Because governments want to get things done, and that's right. Governments should be trying to get things done, responding to popular public views and so on. Now, at the same time, it is important to do things in ways that don't cause long-term destruction, where short-term responses to perceived crisis in a particular political context end up creating long-term damage. And this is why the sort of friction of expectations around rule of law and the friction generated by judicial review and the friction generated by the Human Rights Act and the ECHR as an international checking mechanism is very important, because it makes governments have to think very carefully about the rush to do things that might have potentially cause long-term damage. I personally think the ECHR is a very valuable mechanism in that respect. It's international. It makes governments sort of try and have to think carefully about potential long-term damage to rights and liberties. But views differ. What I would say is that it's very, very easy to smash up something like the UK's relationship with the ECHR, the Council of Europe, with Ireland over the Good Friday Agreement, in response to a summer of headlines about migrant boats coming over from France. The long-term lasting damage of that could be immense. And yeah.
So if the Prime Minister came to you, if Keir Starmer came to you and said, Colm, get me out of a hole here.
Yep.
Maybe he's on the phone like that every night, I don't know.
Every
but
night.
he's saying, I need something.
Yep.
Give me something. Is there a part of the ECHR, I mean, obviously, he's embarrassed himself, he's a former DPP, but is there a part of the ECHR that is tweakable, that is amendable, that keeps us within it, but actually acts to allow me to affect my immigration policy more smoothly and more efficiently?
Yeah, I won't bore everyone with the technicalities. There's an excellent report from University of Oxford out last week that pointed out that the UK has lost, I think, 15 decisions in Strasbourg over 50 years on immigration-related issues, and made, which is to say not very much at all, and made the related point that actually the ECHR jurisprudence is a lot more fluid and a lot more big picture than is sometimes portrayed in the media. And if I was advising Keir Starmer, who has written a book on ECHR law, it has to be said, there's actually quite a lot that he could do in response to migrant boats that wouldn't necessarily lead to an ECHR breach. And there's lots of unploughed ground there, which they are exploring if you look at what they're trying to do in various policies. Now, they might do things that I wouldn't necessarily agree with, but there's lots of flexibility in international human rights law structures and in international governance structures that can be used in a tactical manner. Again, I wouldn't necessarily approve of all of this, but there is room for maneuver there. And for me, I don't understand why people are saying there's no room for maneuver, let's smash all this stuff up, when, to my mind, as a lawyer who happens to specialize in this area, there is, frankly, a considerable degree of room for maneuver, which just isn't being used.
You probably do understand why they're saying that.
Yeah.
Let's smash it all up. Let's go to the next Slido interaction. What is a time when the justice system helped you? So you have to choose an area where access to justice has helped or benefited you. Was it A, housing, house purchasing or a housing problem? B, employment or in the workplace? C, your consumer rights? D, something to do with healthcare or social care? And E, mysteriously other. That's interesting, isn't it?
For those of you in the audience, this is, as you can see, is moving rapidly. For those of you online as well.
Oh, yeah, they can.
Yes.
You can probably see the charts, can't you? So, okay, are we ready to go with it? Consumer rights is sort of vying with employment or workplace for the sort of two top ones, but consumer rights comes top. That's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, what do you think? Go on, Linda.
I think that is interesting. I mean, I think, you know, looking at, you know, things like compensation claims.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that kind of access to justice probably has affected a lot of people, especially if you've bought car insurance in the past few years.
I mean, I guess it could be any. It could be. Would it be cladding as well? I mean, I guess that's housing, right? But I'm trying to think of consumer rights can be
Very broad.
huge, right? Yeah.
I think that's what's probably picking up. I mean, originally it was employment or workplace, and I thought that might actually stay top because I think the, you know, if you have a grievance in your workplace, if you have problems with your, you know, discrimination in your job, I think access to justice is quite fundamental to your livelihood. So I can absolutely see if you didn't have that access, it would be something that would be highly detrimental, not just economically, which is important, but also for you psychologically, given so much of our lives are tied up with, work and jobs. So I kind of thought that might be, but it might just be that consumer rights is, you know, there are a wider range of things that could fall into that if you were missold, you know, various things. So I think that might be. But I think what this shows is, you know, access to, I'm curious about what the other was going to say, because I was going to say housing and health and social care. I think those are also very hugely important for you to have a decent life. But what is the other?
Well, I don't know, but it's in third place right now. So
I know.
we want to know. How would you interpret this, Marsha?
Well, I'm really pleased that because I really do. I say to my team and those and indeed my clients that what I do represents a very, very, very small element of the state misbehaving, and I'm delighted, and I hope the other in there is there's this very small element which is detention, police deaths, people dying in hospital, young people who've joined the army being, dying while doing their army training. So I'm really pleased it's consumer rights.
That's where we want to be.
That's where we want to be, and so that's quite heartening. Thank you.
I think I read recently that something like 90% of all the disputes on eBay are arbitrated by AI now, by a system that just says, is that right?
I read that too,
so, you might have a consumer problem and get it solved in kind of one click.
Well, given that there isn't any funding and they're, in terms of, somebody came to me and said, could you help me with your my consumer right problem? I'd say, sorry, what? There is, so it may be AI that's assisting.
Oh, I don't know. I find that kind of terrifying because, AI is a black box.
Yes, exactly.
It's only as good as, what does someone say? An algorithm is just an opinion in code. So you better hope that the coders of the bots on eBay are really, they really know the consumer rights and the laws.
Let's move on to a last thought. Where is the UK government now in terms of protecting the rule of law and protecting our human rights? And is there another administration that you would look to who is doing better, or who you project as one to follow? We'll start with the UK. I mean, how would you... I guess compared to the US now, you think we're in pretty good shape, right? Is that fair? No. I mean, I don't want to put words into your mouth. All the lawyers are locked up in the US.
Yeah, I'll go. The US is in a bad place right now. Legal uncertainty, actions of the administration that are very not rule of law respecting, the bombing of that migrant boat, of that alleged drug runner boat, which happened to contain 11 people, which meant it was probably a migrant boat, is I think actually a highly significant development because it's state killing without a clear legal warrant. I find it very, very difficult to conceive that a UK government would be doing that in the current moment, though if you know your history, you'll know it's not exactly always done in the past. But the US is in a very bad place at the moment. The interesting thing is whether this will now become a global contagion. And I have to say, Emily, when you ask, which governments are merrily going about their business in untroubled by any of these concerns, I have to say, I think if you do a tour of the liberal democracies, I think many, many countries are grappling with some of these issues. But what does differ from state to state is the degree of commitment to the underpinning rule of law values. And I think that states that are taking a deep breath, remembering first principles, thinking about how to respond rather than smashing things up, they're the states that I suspect in 5-10 years' time will have got through the current difficult moment in a better way than states that are responding with extremist, over-the-top reactions.
And is that us? Are we surviving at the moment? Are we taking that moment to reflect, do you think, in this country?
I would say that I think we've been forced to. I think the states that we look at, historically, we've always looked at New Zealand and Canada. And I think, as Colin says, this isn't just a UK problem. This is a worldwide problem. But we are not yet broken, and I have to live in hope. And I think and believe that as a nation, even though there's a lot of noise, that we can, with working together, actually not fall apart.
Let's do the last Slido. Why is it important to everyone in this room that we uphold the rule of law? In one line, why is it important we uphold the rule of law? Okay, so this is your answers. To guarantee equality and safety for all, ensuring that fundamental rights are protected. I see, so we're just asking you to write a line. Protect those that have power to protect vulnerable people, try and live in a harmonious society. Our society would fall apart without to survive. Yeah. The alternative is anarchy, so that we can coexist together. Chief? I mean, this is all really about the heart of democracy, isn't it? I mean, is that what it says to you, Linda, that you don't have democracy unless you get your rule of law in place?
Yes, I think it goes hand in hand with democracy, because democracy is majority rule, but you have to protect the minority. Democracy is one person, one vote, and therefore you need a system of laws and regulations that ensures that your vote is as good as somebody else's vote, your rights are as good as somebody else's rights, regardless of your station in life. So, thinking back again to when the rule of law was transplanted into the former Soviet states, that came with democracy. That was how you enable democracy to thrive. So without an effective rule of law, I don't think you can have a healthy democracy. And democracies, throwing a bit of economics here, because both of you are talking a little bit about the arc of history. There's a very strong relationship between democracies and countries with strong rule of law and prosperity.
We say basket case, meaning something that sort of collapsed economically and collapsed in terms of our institutions as well, right? Yeah. That's right.
Exactly.
Cole?
If you start losing the rule of law, the wolf comes for everyone eventually. If you sort of say, well, the court shouldn't be involved in this area, refugees, asylum seekers, wherever, and so on, and the court should evacuate that area and just let the politicians decide, then you'll find it difficult to complain when the politicians decide we need to do something about hate speech on social media and start clamping down on tweeting, because then you're going, well, where are the courts? And there's that famous line from A Man from All Seasons about, if the devil is hunting you and you chop down all the trees, and where will you hide behind when he comes for you? If you erode rule of law and based on your particular political philosophy, be very careful about assuming that you'll keep on benefiting from that and that your time won't come.
Last line from you, Masha.
We have to all speak up and stand up for the rule of law. You talked about the wolf coming to the door. I do believe that it's time for many of us to stand up and speak up a bit more. And I, for one, I don't want to find myself in a situation where the wolf has come to the door and I didn't try to assist my neighbour.
Yeah.
The rule of law is important. It's here for all of us. And we want to really maintain all the benefits of the rule of law for a just and fair society. And all of us want to live in a place where our politicians, our government, rule with integrity and continue to be accountable.
Just caught sight of that clock and it says 3:10. Really has flown by, but sorry if I've kept you up. A huge thank you to our panel, to Dr. Linda Yu, to Colm O'Cada, and to Marcia Willis-Stewart. It has been fantastic to just air some of these views. It's a conversation that I think we will continue to have. Many thanks to all of you for coming along and for joining us online, and have a great evening.